I feel heavily betrayed by the left in some ways.
Why are we afraid of the dark?
Men tend to have sex with almost anyone who wants to have sex with them on average.
Hello, this is Waswo X Waswo, Evil O, coming to you again from Udaipur in Rajasthan. And today I have a really special guest. I've been waiting for this interview. Today I am speaking with an instructor of evolutionary psychology and also a fabulous guitar player, Reza Ziai. Reza Ziai. Did I get it?
Yeah, close enough. Yeah.
Okay, good. You will just play all day, I know, but we'll let you jam a little later.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, today we're talking about all kinds of things, and I just want to say right away that when I was younger, my older brother, Dan, was very, very much into the sciences and math, and he actually instructed me at a very early age to have an appreciation for the sciences. And in fact, when I was young, I wanted to grow up to be a biologist, believe it or not an artist, not a writer. I was interested in being a biologist until I realized at a later date that I had to be proficient at math and chemistry, which I wasn't so good at. But when I was in my high school biology class, I was always that obnoxious one in the front row with his hand up who knew every answered every question,
Sure.
like that. But anyway, my brother unfortunately inherited all the brains in math and sciences, but not me. So I have a appreciation for what you do is what I'm trying to say. And I think maybe we start with you just giving a very brief explanation as to what evolutionary psychology is for people who don't know.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I really appreciate it. This is an honor. I'm not used to doing this, so this is a really exciting thing. And I'm just starting to get familiar with your work too. And I now need to go look at it more because I read your Wikipedia page and I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating stuff. So I want to go look at that more now. But evolutionary psychology, thank you for having me. Evolutionary psychology, if I could sum it up, it's basically the study of the brain as it is a biological organ shaped by evolution. So if you admit that the brain is an organ, just like your heart and your skin and your everything else, all of these things are organs. If you admit it's an organ, then it has to have been shaped by evolutionary processes, which it brings up some ethical conundrums with some people. They don't like this idea that your brain was shaped by selective pressures. But that's, people think that it's deterministic, that they say when you're an evolutionary person that you're saying that everyone has to be a certain way, and it's really not. There's no evolutionary theorist, no one, not Steven Pinker, not Gad Saad, none of these people who's saying that if you have genes, then you have to be this. Nobody is actually saying that. That's usually a misunderstanding of evolution that some people have. But that's basically it in a nutshell. I mean, it's the process of selective pressures on how the brain was shaped. It's interesting because the brain, it evolved to a point about 100,000 years ago, which is pretty much the same way as it is now, but the environment is not anywhere close to what it used to be. So we're like Stone Age cavemen walking around with smartphones,
Yeah, everybody likes to think that we make our own decisions. And then there's that whole school that everything is socially constructed, and which I do think a lot of things are socially constructed. Yeah, and I do think we do have decision-making capacity, obviously, but we also have that lower level of instinct, if you want to call it that, or I don't know the proper terminology, the id maybe, but our evolutionary component that makes us react on a very primal level to things. And to me, it's obvious with something like, why are we afraid of the dark?
Right.
Why are we afraid of the dark? Why are we afraid of the dark, but we're okay in the light? I mean, to me, there's something
Right.
evolutionary about that. Um,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah. Well, the first eye that must have evolved, it must have been, some underwater creature that couldn't see, and then the eye, maybe some organism had some adaptation or some mutation that could see some shadows, some from the light, and then if it give it itself some advantage over another organism that didn't have that mechanism, it could escape a predator, get a little faster away. So then the light became something that was good. You could see when your predator was approaching, as opposed to the
right,
dark. So it
right.
makes some sense, But then when you get into things like gender and sex type behavior and division of labor and all this stuff, people get very upset and they lose their
Well,
marbles.
that's where evolutionary psychology gets in a lot of trouble these days, because basically evolutionary psychologists argue that there actually are differences between men and women on a psychological level that is more instinctual. Am I correct? More
Um,
instinctual than constructed.
I don't know about the more instinctual than constructive. Did you say
Than
constructive?
constructed,
Construct. Oh,
not
then
constructed,
constructed.
but more instinctual.
I mean, most evolutionary biologists believe that men and women are basically more similar than different. I mean, there's far more similarities than differences. The similarities between men and women are far more than the differences. The differences are actually very, very small. But the differences, like the differences between men and women's behavior in a modern world are almost zero.
Yeah,
If you give, like, if you teach a woman how to fly a plane, she could fly it better than I could easily. Okay, very easily.
right, right.
It's not hard to understand that. Anyone can understand that. But in an ancestral environment, like if we go, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Naked and Afraid. I don't know if you're familiar with that show. It's a TV show. They put them
No,
on an,
I'm,
they
I'm
put these
too
two
I'm
people
too
on.
removed from the U.S. now to
You're
follow that
lucky. Good
stuff.
for you.
So,
Congratulations. But it's just a show where they put these two people on an island and they're naked and they have to survive on this island for 20 days with nothing. Just they're naked and there's bugs and snakes and all this stuff. And then when you see these people on this island, the gender roles, the sex type behavior immediately comes up right away. You
right,
know, the man is usually, as long as he's a good enough human being to step up to the plate and do things, he's the one kind of going out and hunting and killing and carrying big pieces of wood and digging things, and she's usually doing some other things that you might predict a woman would be doing in an ancestral environment to survive. But in a modern world, you give two people a smartphone or the codes to the nukes or whatever, anyone can press those buttons. It doesn't matter what gender you are.
right. And this might be a little off tangent, but I saw it when I
Yeah.
first came to Rajasthan, because Rajasthan's quite a conservative, patriarchal part of the country.
Is it? Wow.
And now it's changing, okay? But
Okay.
like in the US, I never really felt I was sexist in that I would like go to a bank and I didn't care if I got a female teller or a male teller. Didn't
Sure.
matter to me because I knew I would get equal treatment, equal service. And when
Right.
I came here, I found I started always gravitating towards the male tellers and not the female. And the
Huh.
reason why, and I'm going back 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
many times the female tellers, you could tell they were very new in that kind of position, and
Huh.
they didn't have a lot of confidence, and it seemed like
Hmm.
every question you asked them they had to go run and ask one of the male tellers for the answer. So eventually you just decide, well, I'm going to go to the male teller because he's the one who knows things.
Huh.
It happened enough, it seemed to be a pattern. But now I notice that pattern doesn't exist anymore because the women have been involved in
Sure.
being clerks at the banks for long enough. They have just as much confidence as the
Right.
males. So, I mean, people
Right.
are adaptive, and when they're given
Right.
opportunities, they change,
Right. Of
you
course.
know? So
Absolutely.
to me, it seems to me we have a mix of sort of an evolutionary inheritance and also something that is socially constructed. It's not really black and white, one or the other.
I
You
think that's a
agree?
good way of putting it. I think that's a good way of putting it. I think that's, yeah, I
Yeah.
would, yeah, that's about right.
And
Yeah.
we do have brains, and we can like change our behaviors because we're intelligent
Sure.
beings.
Sure,
But
sure.
we're always going to have that fear of the dark.
Well, we're going to have that and the fear of the snakes and fear of heights and fear of fire and those kinds of things. But it's more than that too. I mean, when you look at mating behavior, for example, if you look at men and women, men tend to have sex with almost anyone who wants to have sex with them on average compared to a woman. If you go up to 1,000 men and you say, would you have sex with an attractive woman who you don't know? Most of the men are going to say, yeah, sure. But if you go up to 1,000 women and you say, would you have sex with a stranger, a guy who you've never met, who's very good looking? It's not going to be 100%. It's not going to be zero, but it's going to be less than 100. It's going to be less than 100%. It's going to be somewhere less than that. Now, the question is, did they say that because society teaches them that they should be coy? Or is it because there's some evolutionary imperative that's going on there? It's hard to be sure at that point. We don't know. The evolutionary psychologist might say that there's some biological mechanism. I think Donald Simons puts it best. We're not genetically that much different, men and women, but we have evolved strategies that are different. So it's beneficial for women to be careful about who they have sex with, because an ancestral woman, if she had sex with the wrong man, she would be in trouble. She would be impregnated by the wrong. There's no birth control. There's no clinic to go to. So she would have to be cautious. So the modern women are the lineage or the descendants of millions of women who had good strategies and survived and made good choices. And modern men are the result of men who they were not selective about who they had sex with. They had sex with whoever they wanted to have sex as much as they could. That's where men get their bad kind of, their bad kind of whatever descriptors that you want to call them.
Their reputation.
Their reputation. Thank you. That's the word I'm trying to.
Right.
They have a bad reputation.
But
they're
the thing is, I get defensive of masculinity because I understand that masculinity was something that was needed. And to me still is needed in many ways. Societies did not function without strong, courageous men who could defend them. And feminists might crawl up a wall at me saying that, but that's pretty much Amazonian tribes were extremely rare if they existed at all. There are some matriarchies in the world. South India has a lot of matriarchy going on, actually. But to be able to defend a civilization, you've always needed those willing, able-bodied men to go out and fight.
It's interesting. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut you off.
No. I made my point. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's making me think like modern times, like why so many people are trying to defund the police, for example. They want to defund cops and get rid of the police department. It's almost like this is like an attack. And I'm speculating. I'm just thinking out loud right now. It almost seems like the defunding of the police is like the left's way to get rid of masculinity in some way too. Because that's the force that's supposed to keep things in order, and it represents the patriarchy, which the left doesn't like. So they say, get rid of the police, get rid of the cops, get rid of the guns, get rid of the order, get rid of the family unit, get rid of all this. It's a strange thing to me. I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know what I think about that.
Well, men have always been a problem for society because the very natures that we have that make us rather indispensable are also natures that make us hard to fit into a civilized society. I do feel that women are very civilizing in their influence. Women are very civilized. You leave men on their own, and it's a nonstop beer party, and, I'm using that as an example.
On average, I got you.
But women helps us because women are concerned about feeding the children. I mean,
hey, now women have beer parties too.
Yeah, I know they do. I know. But I mean, if you go back.
Sure, I know what you mean.
Am I talking a lot of bullshit? I'm not an evolutionary psychologist. But.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Well, there's this idea that men are bad and then women are good. Right. And I'm not sure I buy that completely. But yeah, I think men, if you leave them on their own, they're more likely to do things to get the things that men want and need. And that's not good a lot of the times. And when you leave women on their own, they might do the things that they want to do to get the things that they want to get, but it might not look like them getting a gun and go killing somebody. You know, like the most, like mass murderers are almost never women. You know, they're almost always men.
Right.
Almost across the board. I think there was like even the terrorists like killing people. I think it was like I think the San Bernardino shooter a few years ago, there was a man and a woman.
Right.
But it's almost always a man. Almost 100% a man. So then what do women do then that would be comparable to this? Now, obviously, they're not shooting people, but are women like saints and men bad? You know, because I was looking at some of one of your paintings, and it really stood out to me. It was you on the swing, two of you, one swinging this way and the other swinging that way. And one looked like, and correct me if I'm wrong, one looked like almost gendered. It almost looked like a male and a female, if I'm remembering correctly. But you said in the video that it was more west and east.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Yes.
It could be. I'm sorry. It could be. So I'm wondering, like, you know, when men have a problem, they do things to solve their problems with their evolutionary baggage. When women have their problem, they do things to solve their problems using whatever means they have to solve their problems. And sometimes they're not always very ethical either. You know, like Lori Loughlin. I'm probably not saying her name right, but she was just, I don't know if you heard the scandal. She was just accused of, or sentenced to 4 months or 2 months in jail or something like this for, I don't know, bribing some university officials to get her kids into school or something like this. You know, this woman has probably millions of dollars. She doesn't need to have her kid, to have more than millions of dollars? Like, why do you need that much? You know, why do you have to like bribe these people to get your kid into school when you already have like more money than like, you know, anyone in the town probably has combined? Why would you lie about this? And it's kind of crazy. It's just, but it's interesting though. Men definitely, their deceit and bad things that men do are just different than the deceit and bad things that women do. But I don't agree with the idea that men are bad, women are good.
No. Women can be very calculating, very shrewd, very manipulative. I mean, there's a lot of women I fear.
Do you really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I know a lot of women who are much more intelligent than I, much more politically sophisticated.
Oh, me too.
More, you know, they can. Yeah, they have power, you know. So it's rather.
Oh yeah, they do.
It's rather delusional to think. And you know, I even rented in Udaipur. I rented from a colonel in the Indian Army for a long time, for 4 years. He had a big house, and I rented from him. He was a really nice guy. And his wife, Manju, though, I mean, he was a colonel in the army, but when he came home, Manju had him wrapped around her finger. You know, you knew when you were in that house who ran that house. It wasn't the colonel.
It wasn't him.
Manju ran that house, you know, totally.
Sure. And then that's the idea that I bring up on Facebook a lot, that women, so women are complaining about the patriarchy these days, but I always say that women. So what is the patriarchy? It's men murdering, men raping, men stealing, men doing all these awful things that we don't want in society. But why do men do these things? And it seems to be that they're trying to get money to get the women that they want. And so if the woman says, okay, I want this done a certain way, that man, if he doesn't do it the certain way, he's somewhere else. He's got to go, or she's going to find someone else. There's going to be a problem at some point. That's just how that is. So
I got myself into trouble. There was I was moderating a symposium down in Pondicherry in South India one time. It was a photography symposium, and we were talking about social issues, and somebody brought up that men were responsible for the materialism in our societies, and statistics prove that because men are the ones who do the most, you know, materialistic consumption. And I was like, yeah, but they're buying it all for the women who are demanding.
Yeah, a lot of the times that's true. The two co-constitute each other. You know, all of the bad in the world, like the you know, people killing each other, murdering each other. There's there's men and women involved, but there's also the good things. I use the example of the roads, for example, roads on the side outside. While men historically were building the roads, there had to be someone at home making sure that there was someone somewhere to go to when they were done. So all of these civilizations were created by men and women and families across eons of time. And now I feel like there's a separation there.
But that analogy doesn't hold up so well here in India, because in India, the women are always out building the roads. There's a lot of women on the road.
I have seen that.
There's a lot of women on the construction sites too. And it seems to go back many, many years. It's not like a new thing. It's like always been that way. So, it's more of a class and caste thing that goes on with who's building.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you made. Like, different cultures have different ways of doing things. It's true. That's really true. So like some cultures, they value gender like on the spectrum, like Indian culture, Hindu culture, for example. The gods and goddesses have, there's goddesses that are super powerful, and in other cultures, it's all masculine. But I think there's a lot of variation. Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of variation.
I've come to really appreciate the polytheism here. And I mean, I've always been a bit of an atheist, which goes back to my brother and my science and all of that.
Okay.
But I appreciate the polytheism here, because unlike the Abrahamic religions, if you're sort of unhappy with one God, you can go to another. It becomes more democratic in ways, You make an appeal to one. If they're not really doing it for you, go to the other,
Isn't that cheating though? Isn't that cheating? This one doesn't
work. And
the
gods have arguments among each other, so.
Right. Of course, what else are they going to do?
So before we started this conversation really kind of without getting into like your background. So like, what's your background?
Sure.
I know you're Iranian, but were you born in Iran or were you born in U.S.?
So I was born in the U.S. I was born here in New Jersey. And my parents came to the United States in 1953 from Iran. And my background is very strange. So I tell people that I'm Iranian, and some people say, there's no way you're Iranian. You were born in New Jersey. You can't be Iranian. You don't speak Farsi. You don't do any of this. You're not Iranian. You're an American. So, STFU. And then there's other people who, when I tell them, I say, well, I'm an American. And then they tell me, go back to your country, you sand, N-word or whatever, So it depending on who you ask, they define what my identity is. Right. I'm sure you understand that.
I was surprised. I was listening to one of your lectures, and you were telling your students that, applications and things, you always put that you're white. I was surprised at that, because it's sort of like, I'm surprised you don't play the race card a little bit for social advancement, because you could, I think, right? Or
I probably could. I easily could. That's really interesting that you said that. Sometimes I wonder some of the places that I've been hired at, that they only hired me just because of my background. Right. And I've had a hunch of that at some places, and it's weird. But I'm Iranian. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I don't speak any Farsi. I grew up playing with G.I. Joes, and I ate apple pie, and I listened to Led Zeppelin and The Who, and it was weird. But my brother was older than me, so he was playing Def Leppard and The Who and Led Zeppelin and all this stuff in one side of the house, and my dad was playing really sad Persian music on the other side of the house. So I would hear these two completely different worlds, and my room was literally right in between them. So I'd be hearing, Led Zeppelin, and then over there I'd be hearing, Ravi Shankar or some other artist that had nothing to do with Led Zeppelin or something like that. But my background is very, I kind of don't want to think of myself as an Iranian person, because I don't celebrate any of the holidays. I don't speak Farsi, but I also don't like to think of myself as a person who's not influenced by Iranian culture either. Because I definitely am. I was raised by Iranian. I was raised by a guy, my dad, who was in the Islamic military in Iran, and now he's a Trump supporter.
Okay.
So I mean, very, very. I mean, talk about cross culture there. So I feel like I'm mostly American culturally, but I don't really fit in with a lot of Americans, and I don't fit in with a lot of Persians either.
Yeah, you were saying in some of your posts that when you talk about things like we started with gender differences from an evolutionary psychology perspective, then you get a lot of Trump supporters sort of going,
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And then when they find out you're Iranian, then they kind of go, ooh,
Right.
and
Exactly.
back
Right.
away.
That's what Lindsey Graham said a couple of years ago. I don't know if you caught that they were talking about what's her name, the person who said that she was part Indian. Her name is escaping me. I don't know why I can't. The candidate, you know who I'm talking about. Why
Kamala
is her name?
Harris?
No, the one who said that she was Trump called her Pocahontas.
Oh, Elizabeth
Um,
Warren.
Elizabeth Warren. Thank you. I couldn't
Elizabeth
remember her
Warren.
name.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know, that whole thing is just a very strange thing to me. I don't know what to say. But
The point you made in front of your class was exactly correct. Technically, she would be because she has 0.05 or whatever percent, but
right,
it's no
right,
different than any American might have
right,
genetically. So it's not
right.
really fair to call yourself. I've never done my, what is it called? The genetic test? Um, DNA and me or something like that. What is it called?
Yeah, yeah. There's the one. Yeah, there's a few of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's 23andMe, and there's a couple of them. Yeah, yeah.
I always assume I'm pretty Germanic because that's what I was always told. Both my mother and father are very Germanic,
Okay,
but we trace our family roots through Poland and into Russia, and then somewhere in there a little Irish got thrown in,
okay,
which
okay.
accounts for my explosive temper. My mother would always tell me, I have an Irish temper.
Wow. Okay.
So,
For some reason I thought that you were Indian. For some reason.
oh God, no, I'm not Indian. No, no, I was born in Milwaukee.
Right. I know. I read that, and then but then you lived in India for a while.
Yeah, yeah, I've been in India for over 20 years now. So I mean,
Okay.
this has been my home. I left the US and fell in love with this country, and the
Okay.
country's treated me well, and I love being here. But it's strange.
Yeah.
I left the US during the Bush years, and at that point I was
Okay.
very liberal still, very leftist kind of in my thought. And
Okay.
I didn't want to live under George Bush, and I was happy to be
Right.
over here.
Right.
And there was a point where it's kind of like, oh, just goodbye, America. I don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now, with all the problems the U.S. is going through, suddenly I'm begun finding that I really do still have a lot of attachment, maybe not to
Huh.
the country itself, but to the idea of the country, to the
Hmm.
way the country should have been,
Hmm.
because you look at it, it was basically founded on Enlightenment ideals, that were
Sure.
supposed to slowly manifest itself in this new society. And now the way it's being portrayed as if it was just founded on slavery and greed and colonialism, I think that degrades the whole thing. But
I think when you paint that picture just like that, I think it does degrade it. I agree. I
well,
agree.
how
Yeah.
else how else could you paint the picture?
Well, I mean that it's hard to. I mean, you can't deny that slavery was a part of American culture, of American history. It did
Right.
happen, unfortunately. I mean, that was a part of it. But another part of it was a sense of rugged individualism. You know, like the 49ers who went out west and they had to have their wits about them to survive and to get out there and make something better for themselves and their family. And there's something really powerful and admirable to me anyway about that. But of course they would go out there and they would kill Native Americans while they were doing it. So there's good and bad, I think, in it. I see like a lot of just strong identity, like strong cultural identity and individualism, but I also see a lot of like there is some xenophobia and the racism. I mean, it's real. I think the right just denies it sometimes a little bit too much. But I feel like the left makes it everything out to be racism too. They make everything. All the problem is racism. Everything is racist.
Right. Right.
Which
There are two ends of an extreme. I mean, I grew up in
right.
America. I had some relatives who were definitely racist. I hated it because I would
Oh,
have to go visit them for Christmas every year and all of that. And it's like they were the most racist rednecks you could imagine. we shouldn't say rednecks. They were fairly sophisticated, but they were Germanic in the worst sense of the term.
Okay.
And,
okay. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but okay.
But they had that kind of Nazi inclination, I often felt. But
okay.
that existed, but I don't think it exists in the prevalence that the left makes it out to be today.
The other thing is that collective guilt thing that I don't buy into. Like someone said, I've had, close friends who were German who had parents who were actually Nazis, like literally Nazis. And their kids, they're in the United States. Like one person was a chairman at a department where I was teaching at, and he was the son of Nazis. And it's not he didn't choose that, he doesn't believe those things. But I think some people think like once you're a Nazi, you're always a Nazi, and there's like a gene for Nazism or something like this. But it is kind of interesting though that Germany was the birthplace of psychology. And it is kind of interesting that why was it not in England, or why was it not in China, or why was it not in America? It was in the birthplace of psychology was in Germany. And there's a few reasons why, and it's not an accident either. And it's kind of interesting how it all came about. But there's something about the German temperament, that makes them very exact, very precise. But something was also going on. Like it wasn't like the English were also very precise too, but it didn't manifest there as a science, because the English were still very, very much into the crown and into the church and all this stuff. And they didn't want to put the human heart on the set of scales, or the human soul on the set of scales. And it was blasphemous to study this, and they couldn't do it. And then Germany at the time was unifying all these different duchies and provinces into one place, and they got all this money together, and they made these universities, and they had free speech.
I think duchies is an ethnic slur, isn't it? Duchies?
It is? Oh my God, I did not know that. Is it really?
No, you were talking about duchies in a different sense, I know.
Oh, those no. I mean, a province, like a duchy, a province.
I understand.
Not as in the Dutch. No, I didn't mean it like that. Although I don't know if that's what it means. I didn't mean it as a bad thing. But yeah, they and there's something interesting about German. But so you're. But that German temperament, that there's something about being exact and precise about things that some people just don't want you to do. For example, 2 + 2 = 5 was trending on Twitter a little while ago. And even though it was tweeted mostly by the right, as like a way to respond to the left, because the left is saying dismantle science, defund STEM, and all this kind of stuff. And then the right says, oh, haha, 2 and 2 is 5, you people are stupid. So then that starts trending. But it's interesting though. There's something about exactness and precision that some people don't like. And I always say that some people like those people, them.
Well, there's a difference. There's a difference between stereotyping and generalizing.
Right.
And you were talking about that in your lecture too. I think, in order to talk about groups in any kind of sociological study, you do have to generalize according to the data. That's different than there's always the outlier.
That generalization is not a bad thing. A friend of mine just deleted me on Facebook the other day because of these generalizations that I make. And I had to justify that generalizations are normal. They're healthy, that we evolved to generalize. If you're in a cave and you hear a wind outside, or the leaves are rustling outside, is it the wind or is there a saber-toothed tiger? So if it's the wind, you go back to sleep. But if it's a tiger and you go back to sleep, you're going to die. So you have to use other clues to determine, am I going to be safe if I go back to sleep, or should I wake up and go check it out? Or if I wake up and there's a tiger there, am I going to get killed by the tiger? So you have to make all these inferences based on a limited set of information. Going back to what you were saying before about the quick thinking versus the slow thinking. If you react quickly to something, it's like there's no processing. You just go, and it's like someone cuts you off on the road, and you're like, F you, But if there's someone cuts you off in the road, you could say, well, maybe they were in a rush to go to work. Maybe there's a pregnant woman in the car and they had to get somewhere fast. Or there's a million other reasons. But people don't do that. But we're evolved to make generalizations. Fast cars driving. Maybe they're drunk. Maybe there's a pregnant woman. You make these generalizations. We don't know though, but we're evolved to do it. You know, maybe there was like a clue that millions of years ago, if there's a tree that started blooming at a certain time, it would give food. So then when you saw other trees that would bloom, you would make that generalization. Oh, maybe there's going to be food. But maybe some of the trees would, if you said all trees that bloom give me food, then you might kill yourself, because some trees would bloom and make poison and you could eat it and die. So, but generalizations are normal and healthy to do. Everybody does it all the time. It's just when I go to the airport, they always pull me aside for a random baggage check. But that's just,
well, to me, traditionally, that was always a part of what, I mean, we're in different spheres of influence, but that's to me what was always a part of what the humanities were originally supposed to be about. The humanities were supposed to give you a broad view. You know, it was called the liberal arts, and it was to give you a broad view of society. So yes, you read like novels like Salman Rushdie, The Moor's Last Sigh, or Midnight's Children, or V.S. Naipaul. You might read A House for Mr. Beeswax or something. In all those novels, you read about characters, and they're on all different levels of society and maybe different religions and blah, blah, blah. But the novels take you into their lives, and they show them to you as human beings who have their own peculiarities and are complex. And so, you know, the man who might be out helping at the orphanage feed the poor children and is a good-hearted man with the children might treat his family just horribly and get drunk and beat his wife at night. You know, I mean, novels open up that complexity of an individual to you. And one thing that drives me crazy now is the humanities have sort of flipped that. And now the humanities are telling people to think about everybody in terms of their identity, whatever that is, and then sort of makes these broad, more than generalizations about what that identity must be, you know? So it's like, I understand identity politics to some extent because I'm gay, and when I was young, I fought for gay rights and all of that stuff. But my primary identity is not a gay person. My primary identity is an artist and a writer who lives in India. There's so much more to me that's a little footnote. You know, that's a footnote to who I am. And that's one reason the way identity politics has evolved, I find it so. It's just the opposite of what it should be. Yeah, I agree. And you seem like you're an artist who happens to be gay. Right, exactly.
Right.
And that's not even a major thing. It comes into my art once in a while, but I mean, generally, I think my homosexuality is sort of a footnote to my life at this point.
And that's the strange. Yeah, the identity politics is a weird thing. I mean, it's like people look at one aspect of something, and maybe it's just easier to look at that one thing rather than understand the amalgamation and all the complexities of a person. It's just easier to look at one thing and say, well, that's what it is. But if you bring up something else, they'll kind of ignore it because it's easier to focus on the one thing, whether it's a person being gay or a person being like black or whatever it is. Maybe it's just easier to do that, or useful or something like that. But it doesn't make any sense to do, and I hate it. I mean, I just absolutely hate that stuff. You know, it's just mind-boggling. It's like some people would look at me, for example, and they would say, "Well, he's Iranian, he's Middle Eastern, he should go back to his own country." Like just the other day, I had an interview somewhere. I won't say where, but I had an interview somewhere. And the person there immediately, like within seconds, said, you know, in order to work here, you're going to need to understand certain phrases, American phrases that the average American can understand. And I was like, I know. Fortunately, English is the only language that I know how to speak. So I think I'm going to be okay with that. And then she was kind of shocked. And she was like, oh. And like some people look at me and they immediately think I must speak some weird language and go, ha, 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 all the time. And I don't. I just don't. And then, but it shocked her, I think. She was surprised. I think she was expecting me to not understand, you know, innuendos or idioms or things like that. And I do. But, and then other people, they look at me and one time I was at a I don't want to give up too much information here, but I was at a party, and there was a chairman who invited me there, and his wife. I was new at the school, and his wife was there, and a lot of professors were there from other schools. It was a nice party, and anyway, the guy's wife said was there, and some other professors were there, and she said, "This is our new Muslim professor." And I was like,
Did she really? You're
"Yeah,
kidding
she did."
me.
No, I'm dead
That
serious.
was really the introduction.
That's what she
Oh,
said.
that's unbelievable.
That's what she said. That's exactly what she said. This is our new Muslim professor, Reza. I looked at her and I said, I'm not Muslim. And
Right.
me in a party, I'm a wallflower. I'm like a complete idiot at parties unless I start drinking, and it's a real disaster. And I just say the wrong thing. So I just looked at her right in the middle of all these people, these tenure professors. Here I'm just this adjunct, and I said, I'm not Muslim. And she got really embarrassed. And she walked away, and everyone just dispersed. And I was just standing there holding my drink.
Oh, you're kidding.
And that was the end of it.
Wait.
No,
Why did they react to that? That's a strange reaction. You would think
I
she would
think I
say something
embarrassed her.
like, "Oh, I'm sorry, blah, if you
She
don't
did. No, no, no.
identify as Muslim," but she just walked away. Oh God.
Yeah, she did say I'm sorry. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then she walked away. And then the other people there, they kind of like went, "Oh, what's going on?" And they all walked away too. And that was it. It was kind of awkward. But then another place that I interviewed at, the chair there, we were walking around. It was in New Jersey. We spoke in his office, and then he said, "Let me show you around town." And I said, "Okay, great." And so we were walking around, just walking around the city and New Jersey, and he said, "This is the athletic center. Okay, that's nice. We're walking around." He's like, "This is the movie theater. Okay, that's nice. This is a great place." And so I said, "You're gonna like it here." And I said, "Yeah, sure, great." And then we're walking around, and he said, "And you're gonna like it. And all of the mosques are right over here." And I was like, really? Oh, well, the mosques. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, if I was black, would you take me to a park and be like, "This is where the basketball courts are"? You know, it was a very strange thing. I don't know how to react to that.
I
When I tell
imagine you get called an Arab quite often too, right?
that too, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The other day, I told someone that I write music with Middle Eastern instruments, and she said, "Oh, it's too Eastern sounding for me." And I said, "Like what?" And she sent me a song that had the word China in it. And I said, "China is not the Middle East. That's like the Far East." And she's like, "Oh, I thought that was part of the Middle East." I'm like, "What do you? No, no, no. China's the East." A lot of people are just really clueless, and they
You're
don't know
really
what to.
clueless about world geography in
I
the
think
US
so.
and especially
Yeah,
world politics. I notice that.
yeah,
I mean, even the news media spends so little times on international politics or events.
they
And that's
do.
one thing I
They
do turn
do.
into Al Jazeera once in a while because
Oh
they
yeah,
cover what's going on in Africa. You
right,
know, they cover what's going on in the Congo or something like that, as
right,
opposed to CNN, you know, or
right.
or even BBC. CNN is just amazing to me now. I used to put my faith and trust in CNN, but since like 2015, it's so one-sided, it's unbelievable. They've
Yeah,
become the mirror image of Fox News, and I would even say
right,
Fox News is more open-minded than CNN now.
right.
Um,
Yeah. Sometimes it does seem that way. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The poll. Yeah,
But I
yeah,
still, Reza, I still call myself a liberal. I mean, I still feel I'm a liberal. So I'm one of those I didn't
yeah,
leave the left left me kind of
yeah.
people, you know?
Right. As opposed to Dave Rubin, who says he left the left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Left the
The left
left.
left
No.
you.
The left
Yeah.
left me. It's an old line now, but I mean, that's kind of the way I feel. They went off the deep end.
It feels like there's a sense of betrayal that I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like a sense of betrayal from the left a little bit. Like Salman Rushdie, for example, back in the 80s, the left defended him. They would come and they would say, like, I think Sean Penn let him stay in his house. I think Bono from U2 let him stay in their house. And he was a refugee, so they said, "Stay here." But now, if you're ex-Muslim or apostate or something like this, the left does not want to have anything to do with you. You're basically a Fox News supporter, a Trump supporter. They won't have anything to do with you. And then you bring up J.K. Rowling and the gender stuff. I feel heavily betrayed by the left in some ways. And then I feel like you. I was pushed out of the left.
So do I. I mean, free speech to me is like just like a sacred value.
Yeah.
Okay, because we never could have made any progress with civil rights or whatever
Right.
without free speech. We needed it. And people don't realize once that's gone, you have to
Yeah.
shed blood to get it back. You just have to shed
That's
blood
right.
to get it back. There's no other way to
That's
do
right.
it once you lose your free speech. And you've seen this in other countries. And I mean, part of my transformation was Charlie Hebdo in Paris. And like, yeah, it
Right.
was an outrageous paper, but when those
Yeah.
cartoonists who were artists, got killed,
Yeah.
my artist group on Facebook, they were all horrified at first. But then as soon as they started circulating some of the cartoons that Hebdo had published, they all turned against them and basically sort of did well, they deserved it kind of attitude,
Yeah. Right.
And it's like, well, yeah, a lot of it was in poor taste, maybe, and blah blah
Yeah.
blah.
But,
But France had a very different idea of free speech than
right.
India does.
Right.
There was no idea that to protect people from receiving offense. That idea was not part of French culture.
Right.
It might be a distraction now.
Even if it
So,
was in bad taste, you wouldn't kill someone for doing that. That's crazy.
yeah. Yeah, if I could kill people with bad taste, there'd be a whole lot of people dead.
That's
Bad
funny.
taste is everywhere. God.
Yeah, right. That's funny you mentioned that because I was with a date of mine at the time. Shortly after Charlie Hebdo, there was the shooting in Dhaka. I don't know if
Oh
you
yeah,
remember,
yeah.
where they went in the coffee shop and they said recite the Quran and they put them up the wall.
Oh
And
yeah. That
and
was
they couldn't.
what was it called? Some kind of bakery.
Yeah, something like there's a cafe or bakery or something like that. And I was with a friend of mine. I was on a date with my girlfriend at the time, and she was half Persian and she didn't speak Farsi. But we were there eating, and it came up on the news, and we were horrified. And what's going on? And then she said, it's so awful that the United States goes all over the world and then makes these people do these things. I said, wait, what? The United States made those people do that? And she said, yeah. And I said, wait a minute. No, the United States did not make those people. Those people did that. They did that.
Right.
The United States didn't do that. They did that. Okay?
There's always that shifting of blame from the perpetrators. And that bakery incident did affect me greatly because when I read that, I mean, my partner Tommy had been in Dhaka. I've never made it yet. But it was like, well, God, this is exactly the sort of place Tommy and I'd probably be sitting in if we were in Dhaka. It catered to foreigners. It catered to tourists,
Right.
And
Right.
there were some horrible stories came out. There were 3 Indians who were there, 2 girls and 1 boy, and the girls were Hindus and the boy was a Muslim, and the terrorists basically told the Muslim boy he could go, but that the girls had to stay, and he refused to leave them. So they were all taken into the kitchen, and you just knew what went through these girls'
Right.
mind. As soon as they were taken to the building, they knew they would never see the light of day again.
Right. That's crazy. That's crazy.
Like,
that's crazy. But that the denial, the just
right.
outright denial of it, like this is not a problem, and it really that opened my eyes. That like you that was around that time, 2014, 2015, somewhere around 2013, around that time. It was just I realized that the people who I thought were supporting me leaving religion, I thought they had my back, because when there was a Christian person who left their religion, that was okay.
Right.
When I left my religion, I was a bad person, and it didn't make any sense to me. Why are you supporting this ex-Christian and going very good, but when I'm leaving my religion, I'm a bigot? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I lost a lot of friends because of it, and it was really awful. Actually, it's pretty depressing.
Yeah, there's a double standard that started to develop around 2015, and that's when like Majid Nawaz coined the term aggressive left, and
yeah.
I really felt that we would sort of win that battle, but it seems like we've lost it. The culture war seems to have really fallen on the other side now, it seems to me. Where the people who think like you and I suddenly have become peripheral.
I feel like I'm invisible. That's what it feels like. I feel totally invisible in the society. I mean, the left just doesn't want to have anything to do with me because I'm the ex-Muslim evolutionary psychology guy. I don't exist. They don't want to have anything to do with me. I represent everything that they hate, but they want to like me because they don't know what to do with me. I've been at universities where they have told me, I've had professors come up to me on several occasions telling me that the chair and the dean and all the people higher ups, and they've used that phrase, they don't know what to do with me because I'm this person of color, supposedly, that they should like, but I represent all of the things that they don't want to hear. So I'm like the wrong minority.
You're the wrong minority, or the minority with the wrong views. Let's talk about your guitar a little bit.
Okay.
How did you get interested with your band?
How did I get interested in my band? Well, I don't have a band right now, but I got interested in the guitar when I was real little. I was probably about 14 years old, and I got into it. My brother came home from school one day. He was in college. He's 9 years older than me. He rebelled against my parents, and he brought a dog home and a guitar, which neither of those things were acceptable in my Muslim household. And so he brought them home, and he played with his dog, and I played with the guitar. And that was the rest is history. I just started playing. But it's kind of like an extension of me. I just got into it.
You're really good. I've got your songs right now because I couldn't remember the names. But
I'm embarrassed.
How do you say it? Phylogeny?
Phylogeny, yeah.
Phylogeny. That's an incredible song. And the video is really good, too. I'm going to actually insert that at the end of this video. I'll insert your video, okay?
Thank you, sir.
That's an incredible one. And Panspermia.
Yeah, I wish I made a more elaborate.
And Sanctify. Those three.
Those three are probably the most elaborate songs. Yeah. I really got into writing songs when I realized that I couldn't form a band. I was getting involved with musicians who wanted to tell me what to play, and I was just kind of headstrong when I said, no, I'll tell you what to play. It's like having too many cooks in the kitchen. You know, somebody wants to do omelets, and somebody wants to make eggs, someone wants to make a cake, and, you know, it becomes whoever's like the most popular person, we're just going to do that. And I just got tired after a while, and then I just bought the equipment. I just started doing it myself. You know, I just started making all the songs myself and writing myself. And the average person thinks I'm insane because nobody spends all that time alone to do something that almost nobody cares about. It's like, why would you spend all that time in countless hours, weeks, months, years, just in total isolation, perfecting a craft that almost 100% of people don't care about at all? And if you played it to them, maybe a couple people would care. Why would you ever do that? But I do. It's crazy to some people.
Well, let's talk about that from the evolutionary psychology perspective. Like,
oh boy,
last night I refreshed myself. You know, Dennis Dutton, the art instinct guy.
I've heard that name.
If you haven't read that book, you should read it. Dennis Dutton, The Art Instinct.
Okay.
He's not an evolutionary psychologist, but he relies a lot upon evolutionary psychology in the way he talks about art. So he basically says things such as, when, you know, most people will appreciate a landscape that is blue and shows water and trees and has a certain amount of open space. And basically he equates that to our evolutionary brain that we see, you know, good hunting grounds. We see trees. It's open enough. We can see predators, and we still have trees to climb in case we're attacked. And the trees also signify fruit bearing and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, he goes into art on that kind of it's an interesting book. But
I'm familiar with some of that research.
Have you thought about that? So what's the function of music from an evolutionary psychology perspective?
See, this is a great question.
Have you thought about that or no?
I've thought a lot about that, and this is one place where I totally disagree. And maybe your viewers are going to hate me for saying this.
Go ahead.
But I totally disagree with Steven Pinker on this.
Okay.
110%. Steven Pinker, I have 100% respect for, and The Blank Slate is top 3 favorite books of mine of all time. Okay, I just want to put that out there.
Okay.
But so I admire him. I really respect his work and him. But he says that music is evolutionary cheesecake. That's his phrase, and he says it serves no adaptive function. And I just simply don't agree with that. When I look at whales and birds and insects making like rhythmic noises, and it seems like it's too universal for it to be a byproduct, if you ask me. But I'm not Steven Pinker. I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but it just doesn't seem like it has no adaptation to it. To me, it seems like there is a function. Music seems sexy somehow. I don't know. I don't know how to put it.
I think it's sexy, but also I think it reinforces tribal cohesion.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
you see that, like you hear the drummers in like a ceremony in India or
Yes.
something, like in Kerala.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and you just see these Carolan men and women too, and you know, there's just this bonding, like, yeah, we're Carolans, you know,
Yeah,
and that
right,
music binds
exactly,
them together.
yeah.
And you see the same thing like at a heavy metal concert,
You do,
or even at
it's
a disco or something. But it's like, here's the tribe, here we all are thumping to this beat, you know.
That's so funny you mentioned that, because I've been trying to look for this article ever since 1993 when a professor of mine shared it with me, and I cannot find it. And I keep looking, and if anyone is listening to this and they can find it, please send it my way. But it's talking about exactly what you were talking about. They compared people banging on a drum, like tribal drums, and people meditating, and people who took a small amount of LSD. And they found that their brains were basically physiologically they're almost identical in some ways. So there's a serotonin receptor site, a 5-HT2A receptor site that gets activated with Prozac, and it gets activated with LSD and mushrooms and all these things. And it happens to also get activated when you're having these spiritual kinds of experiences, and bobbing your head up and down, rhythmic kind of things are also part of that. So that to me, it seems music is evolutionary. There's some tribal cohesion thing. There's some sex involved. There's a lot of things involved with it.
Yeah, the Metropolitan Opera is the Hamptons tribe.
Exactly, right. Yeah, right. The marble. Yeah, right. They got all the marble up there. Right. Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah. They're a different kind of tribe. They charge a little bit more, and they have fancy cars. But they're their own tribe. They got their own.
There's cohesion.
Absolutely. There's a lot of cohesion there. So I mean, that's where Steven Pinker would say that. And I mean, I don't know what he would say now, because I don't know. And he made that comment, I think, years ago. And I think Jerry Coyne wrote an article refuting Pinker himself. So I think most evolutionary biologists disagree with Pinker. Most musicologists disagree with Steven Pinker on this. I disagree with Steven Pinker on this. I've tried to directly talk to Steven Pinker about this on Twitter, and he hasn't written back to me, but I don't know why he would. But I'm curious how he can justify that music is evolutionary cheesecake, or auditory cheesecake. Evolutionary cheesecake, auditory, one of those. I forget what it was. Evolutionary auditory cheesecake, one of them. But I don't know. To me, it's interesting you said that it's like group, because my family was kind of a messed up family in a lot of ways. And so for me, music was a way I could go down the basement and just jam with my friends. And it was a way to get people together, you know, and that was a way to get away from my kind of messed up childhood and just be with my friends. And I felt good doing that. And then you play parties and you get together, and there was like a communal kind of thing. And now it's weird. Like music is like, it used to be like you sit in a room, and you probably done this on like someone's attic, like blasting speakers, like the big, huge speakers, blasting, open up the windows, smoke some weed or whatever. And now everyone listens to music in these little tiny earbuds in their ears, and they're walking around, and like there could be like 55 people sitting next to each other, and everyone's listening to a different song. Whereas, you know, in the subway in the 70s in New York City, someone got a boombox, everyone in the subway is listening to that song no matter what. I mean, there's just no other way around it. And now music is such an insular, singular, like egocentric phenomenon almost.
I read an article one time, this was way back decades ago, but I thought they made a big case that the polarization in America really started when FM radio came about, because before that you had very little choice in musical stations. So when you were listening to AM, you had sort of the top 40. And on the top 40, you might have a little rock and roll, you might have some country western, you might have some soul, but everybody was exposed to a little bit of everything. even some patriotic music. And when FM came in, there was a division. And then you've got, you know, the heavy metal, the progressive rock, classical rock, you know, how it's all broken down now. Soul, rap, hip hop, whatever it might be. And so that allowed for tribes to develop, because they ceased being one tribe, which was like the American tribe, and they became disparate tribes.
That's really interesting.
You know,
yeah, that makes me, I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm sorry about
That's
that.
Okay.
Right when you were saying that, it made me think of Jimi Hendrix. And when he was coming out with his music in the 60s and 70s, the radio stations didn't want to play Hendrix because they said, you know, you're a black guy and you don't belong on the radio. And when his songs did get on the radio, the Black Panthers would be like, you're a traitor, you're going on the white stations. Right. And so like everyone hated him, and he was just like, I'm just playing the guitar, man. I just want to rock out.
He was doing what he wanted to do, and he did it so well.
He really did. He was the man.
Incredibly well.
Yeah, he sure did. Yeah, but he was another one. He didn't want to be recognized as an African American guitarist, but he didn't want to be thought of as a person whose African American roots didn't affect his life too.
Right.
And I'm kind of like that. I don't want people thinking that I'm an Iranian, I'm an ex-Muslim. I'm, you know, screw all that. I'm just a person, but I want to be thought of as a person who is affected by that. You know, when someone says like, there's all this stuff, like when we're going, like, imagine if you're like, okay, if you were in a country, okay, say you're in India, okay?
Yeah.
So say for example, India, for whatever reason, obviously this wouldn't happen in a million years, but for whatever reason, India decides to go to war with the United States. Okay, just for example, it would never happen in a million years, but just for example, and they say, okay, here's your gun, go over there and fight the United States. Would you go over there and start shooting Americans? You know, and then so the question is, like, if there was a war against Iran and they say, okay, you're drafted, here's your gun, would I go there and kill Iranians? I mean, this is a very strange thing, you know. So when we hear like Iran and the United States, World War III, all this kind of stuff, you know, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but it puts me like in the middle a little bit. You know, I don't have loyalties to mullahs, obviously, but
that's exactly the situation a lot of Germans are faced in the world wars. I mean, like my grandfathers, you know, they spoke German. My father didn't speak German, but my father went off to World War II, you know, and because he felt himself to be an American, you know, because in fact, my grandfathers made a specific point not to teach their children German, because they were thinking, you know, now there's a great emphasis, and what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, but there's a strength, you know, placed upon being bilingual, trilingual. That's all considered very positive. Yeah. But in those days, it was considered, if you learn to speak English, then you're like a true American. It was kind of bullshit, but that was the zeitgeist of the times.
Sure.
And so my father didn't know German because his parents refused to teach it to him, to make him a true American.
That's what my parents did with me. Yeah.
They did the same thing. Okay.
But it's a strange kind of thing, because, you know, it is a strange thing, because you know, that language thing, it's weird. People don't realize how much language affects your behavior. You know, they did a study where they got Venezuelan nationals, Americans, and Japanese, and they were bilingual people. And they asked them to speak their native language to one another. And the researchers measured the distance that these speakers were standing away from each other. And the Americans, the Japanese, they stood the furthest apart from each other. The Americans were in the middle, and the Venezuelans stood very close to each other when they were speaking their native language. But when they started speaking another language, they started standing at the same distance that you would expect those the native language to speak. So the Japanese people, when they were speaking English, they started standing at a stance that the English speakers would normally stand at. And I think, which is kind of interesting. Like if you look, and they didn't use Arabs, but you know, Arabs, when they talk to each other, they sometimes stand almost at like kissing distance, very close to each other, that almost whispering, and they look directly into each other's eyes, which you don't do in American culture. If you did that, it's almost offensive or threatening in some ways.
Right.
But I wonder how much of that language barrier or difference is affecting some things, just miscommunications online or something just internationally or something like that too. I don't know.
There's a lot of cultural differences, I had to get used to living in India because coming from a Germanic background, I mean, we were kind of, my parents were the sort that, we didn't have a lot of friends. They didn't have a lot of friends. And we lived on the outskirts of Milwaukee. It was almost rural. And it would be like in 2 weeks on a Sunday, our friends are coming over for a Sunday night dinner. It was always very formal like that, our friends. And then it'd all be set very properly, for the dinner. Whereas Tommy's family was Italian, and Italians are much more like Indians. It's sort of like the door's always open, just come into the kitchen, manja, manja. Right. Everybody, welcome. And India is very much like that too,
Right.
I've had adjustments. Another thing is the sense of social distancing, just not in regards to COVID, but like you can be standing having a conversation on the street in India, and not so much in the urban centers, but in a smaller place like Udaipur, and some total stranger will walk up to you and just like stand like 2 feet from you. Just listen, and you'll say to your friend, "Is this a friend of yours?" They say, "No, I don't know who he is."
Stranger, right?
He's just interested in what
he's
we're
just
saying.
Standing there, right?
He's standing there, right? And it's like, okay, that doesn't happen in the U.S.
No, that doesn't. Not really. No, it doesn't. When I went to India, the first thing I noticed, aside from just the immediate shock value, I saw, and this is my ignorance here, I saw a lot of Indian men holding hands.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And my immediate thought, being the ignorant American that I was, wow, there's a lot of gay people in India. Meanwhile, that's not what most of them are doing. Men in India just hold hands.
There was no social hang-up about it, and friends, if they're male, hold hands. You'll see policemen, you'll see army officers holding hands and walking down the street. Although it's declined, sadly, it's declined over the past 20 years because of the import of the American television. And there's more of awareness now of gay issues and gay people. And so I see fewer and fewer people do that these days.
Oh, really?
Because I think they've become self-conscious of it now.
Wow.
Which is kind of sad.
That is kind of sad.
It is.
I thought that was kind of cool. I thought that was interesting. I was like, wow, I saw police officers. That's right. They were holding hands as they were walking down.
You still see it, but you don't see it as much. In the old days, if somebody was showing me where something was, many times they'd just take my hand and lead me. It was a very friendly thing. They would just lead me. They would hold my hand and take me. Happens very rarely now. People don't just grab my hand and take me someplace.
Well, you're a little older now.
I'm a little older. So this is getting long, but before this will be a long talk, but I just want to go into one more thing. So what does evolutionary psychology have to say about the tribalism in the US right now?
Oh boy. Oh God.
What do you think?
Well,
are we naturally tribal? Does tribalism have a function that we break into these tribes?
Well, it depends who you ask. So some people will say that again, this is where it comes down to group selection or individual selection, and there's no end to that debate. Dawkins and E.O. Wilson were going at it a few years ago. My view is that tribalism does serve a function. It's cohesive. It keeps people together. Even though there's idiosyncrasies and there's things that don't make any sense, it's those things that don't make any sense that sometimes make things work, if that makes any sense. It's kind of there's a pleiotropic effect to a lot of things. Pleiotropic means that there's good things and then there's bad things. So for example, testosterone in men helps them become you could be strong, you can get food, you can protect and do these things. But if you have too much testosterone, then men have a higher rate of cancer. So testosterone good, but too much bad. So I think the same thing is with tribalism too. There's a benefit to it that can keep societies and people together, but if you have too much of it, I think you see what we're seeing right now in the United States, which is kind of a crazy situation.
I always think that that's what the globalists really don't understand, because it's funny that I'm rather anti-globalist when I've picked up and moved to
Yeah.
the other side of the
I was thinking the exact same
world.
thing right there. It's
But
exactly what I was thinking.
is that what you were thinking?
Hey, hey,
Well,
you know.
I see pluses to globalism, but I see so many downsides. So I mean, I think their vision is sort of a Star Trek universe where you have people of all different sorts on the bridge, and they're all working together and happy and having a good time. They're the team. But in reality, I know, like last week, I interviewed Mohammed Mustafa, who's a young Muslim Indian boy who's in Paris. He got stranded there, and I talked to him. But I mean, it was obvious that not only was he making French friends, but he had gone out of his way to seek out other Indians who were now living in Paris so that he could hang out with them and go to the cafes. So he was looking for his Indian crowd, you know, which to me is normal. And we expats, we do the same thing, you know, and like, especially there aren't hardly any expats in Udaipur, but if you go to a place like Goa, it's like, you know, the foreigners all hang out together, you know, because they have a shared culture and a shared understanding. They don't have to go through lengthy explanations about things because they just know. You know, they just grew up, you know, and I don't think the globalists get that, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that analogy is really interesting with the Star Trek and the different aliens all getting along with one another and coexisting peacefully and everything is fine. I mean, I guess in theory that could work, but you know the social construct of this would say that could work. But then on the other hand, when you put blacks and whites, for example, in an MRI, you put blacks in an MRI and you show them white faces, their amygdala fires. That's like aggression and fear. And you put whites in an MRI and you show them black faces, the same thing happens. And there's a lot of lines of evidence. So if you get a bucket of mole rats, it's just white rats, and you put them in a bucket and you measure their baseline cortisol levels, they're at a baseline, and you can have different subjects. You can add more white rats into it and then measure the cortisol levels and it stays the same. But if you have another bucket of rats and you add black rats in there, the cortisol level spikes of both the white rats and the black rats. Even though they're the same species, just the same color there, it changes the nature compared to the whites introduced with the whites. So can we all get along?
What does the cortisol measure? I mean, how does that affect? Is that like a tension like chemical?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's a stress hormone. So when you're under stress, you release cortisol, it's usually, so like in ancestral times, like if you saw a lion, your cortisol levels would spike. So you're going to run away or you're going to fight. That's what happens. And it's adrenaline, basically. It's adrenaline. And it's good to have that so that you can run away or fight. But in modern times, it's almost like the adrenaline, we're always on the go. Like we're stuck in traffic, we can't sleep. We're addicted to drugs, we have bad eating habits, bad exercise habits. Your boss is yelling at you, your spouse is yelling at you. People are just stressed. And the cortisol level, instead of spiking, and then you fight the lion or run away, and then you go back down to a baseline, we're always in this state of constant cortisol levels. And what happens, and the physiologists know this, the cortisol level, it doesn't get used up for energy to fight the lion. It goes in the adipose tissue and it becomes fat. Then that's what, so that's the thing that the medical community doesn't want to talk about, the link between stress and obesity. There's a big link there. But I forget what we're talking about, the cortisol. Why were we talking? We're talking about.
No, we're talking about multicultural societies, globalism.
Right. You know. So if they're stressed, if people are stressed and they have cortisol coursing through the body already from whatever, and then they see people from another culture, ideally we would say, well, I'm open-minded. I want to learn about their food. I want to learn about their music. I want to learn about their dress and their dance and their poetry and all of these things. We want to learn these things, and ideally we can come together. But there's this dialect that says, or this narrative that says we're all the same, and at the same time we have to embrace diversity. How can we be all equal and embrace diversity at the same time? It's not, we can't be. We're not all the same. We're not all equal.
We're not the same as individuals, neither are we the same as groups.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. Yeah, and if we're going to embrace diversity, we need to accept the diversity that exists there first before we can even embrace it. But if we say
Well,
embrace diversity and then say we're all the same, how do we do that?
one thing I often say, I mean, I absolutely love Indians and I love
Me too.
Rajasthanis. I really love
Yeah,
Rajasthan a lot. And I'm really thankful that a place like India and Rajasthan has opened their hearts to me and have allowed me to stay here for so long and sort of fit in and become a part of the scene. And I would hope that when people go to like France, that France would open their doors in the same manner. But there is a tipping point. You know, if Europeans or Americans in Udaipur suddenly became 50% of the population, tensions would
right,
arise. I
right,
know that for a fact. It wouldn't even
right,
take 50%. If we got up to 8%, there'd
right.
probably be tensions, you know.
Yeah,
And
probably.
so the same thing's going to happen with Europe with immigrants. And so I
Yep.
think some of this is just denialism because people
Yeah,
do like to congregate within their tribe, for a better word,
they do. Yep. Yep.
where they
That's
have
absolutely right.
the same history, the same cultural baggage, all of that. Um, I
Yeah.
don't know.
There was, there was, I know, a lot of people make fun of Heidegger and postmodernism, and I love to do that too. But there's one excellent book by Heidegger, and it's only like 70 pages long. It's very thin, and he gave a memorial address to a composer, Konrad Kreutzer, and it's a speech that Heidegger gave at his funeral. And it was right after World War II, and he was first he said lamentations about the dead composer, and he's saying I'm sorry about the dead. He was a great German and all this stuff, and then he goes on and he starts like getting really poetic about how Germany has lost its way, and now that the world is over, we lost our autochthony, and I love that word, our autochthony, and it's like that constitutional meaning and ground. Like who
What's the
are
word? What's the word?
Yeah, autochthony. It's AUT, like
Yeah,
so autochthony, AUTO.
autochthony, not
Yeah,
autonomy, but autochthony. Okay,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
okay.
autochthony. Yeah,
And what
and
does it mean?
it, yeah, it's hard to find any definition outside of legal books, but I think the etymological root is like a meaning and ground of a group of people. So like what that ground is, like who are the Germans after World War II? What does it mean to be an American now when everyone is so different? Who are the Indians now? Who are the Europeans now? There's so much immigration. What is the constitutional makeup has shifted so much in so little time that there's no time to make that equilibrium go back. It's like all of these people that are now coming in contact with each other didn't even know of each other's existence like 100 years ago. You know, we're accelerating our rate of communication and transportation, and people who did not know of each other are now aware of each other. I mean, just look at the Sentinelese. They don't want people on their island.
All right,
You
of
know,
course.
just like some Texan Trump supporter doesn't want some Mexican climbing over the wall. It's not that much different. Or someone from in Iran, the mullahs in Iran don't want someone just hiking and going into their country either. Nobody wants that. And it's crazy though. I don't know. I think that evolutionary psychology, my beef with it is that it lacks some, and now my colleagues are going to get mad at me. It lacks some useful utility in it lacks practical purpose. Sometimes it's interesting, but what do you do with this information? How can you make the world better with evolutionary psychology? And I don't know. I really
Well,
don't
you can
know.
you can start by informing people of what evolutionary psychology has to say, and I think certain people have done a really good job of that. You do it in your
Yeah,
lectures, but I
I
mean,
try.
there
I
are
try.
there are speakers who have tried to just bring up some of these issues just so people think about them. Because
Yeah.
to me, and I mean, one reason my friends now think I'm really right wing, some of them, but I mean, I don't feel that way.
Really?
And maybe
Yeah.
I've become more conservative, but it's only because I feel that the Western left is running an incredible social experiment. They want to run these
Yep.
incredible social experiments right now, like
Yeah.
defund the police,
Right. Right.
free healthcare for immigrants, no border enforcement. I mean, I'll be accused of simplifying that or misstating it, but that's the general gist of it.
I got you.
And that's the general gist of it. And it's like, well, that's a huge social experiment because that's never really been done in a society before. It's never, I mean, yeah, we have had societies with universal health care, and some of them have done very well with that. And I would support that probably. But I wouldn't support it for people who are not citizens, or who have crossed illegally into the country. That becomes a different issue. So they're running experiments, and they don't really know how deep some of these problems run, I feel, and they don't really understand human psychology. And I think the experiment might be a big collapse. And they're not going to be prepared for it when it happens.
I agree with you. Yeah, that's the one thing about evolutionary psychology. If I could just add, I know we're probably going way over time, but that's up to you. But one thing and Gad Sad could probably explain this way better than I can because that's his area of expertise, not mine. But the banking systems in evolutionary psychology, they talk about where these banking systems come from, and it's not just written on a blank slate. Like some people think, we can't just make money come out of nowhere and just give it to people. It's like the banker's paradox, for example. If you had limited resources yourself and someone came and knocked on your door, or not even, say you didn't even have a house and you're walking through the forest and you had like next to nothing and you yourself had to survive, and you saw another person there and they were maybe wild-eyed and blood covered on their body, and maybe they look kind of crazed or something like that, you might not want to even help them. Maybe you might want to protect yourself from that person. But if you were walking through the woods and you were a little bit haggard and you saw someone who was maybe in a good position, they had some water and some food, you might want to approach that person and say, hey, how you doing? And the banking system, people think that it's removed from that, and it's really not. It makes sense that, unfortunately, the people who need money the least are most likely to get it. If you go to a bank and you have no collateral, they're not going to give you money. But if you go to a bank and you have $10 million collateral, they'll give you all the money you need. And it shouldn't be that way, but that's just how it is. Like the people who need money the least are most likely to get it. And people think that that's written on a blank slate. We could just get rid of the cops and we can change this. These mechanisms are as old as dirt. Like they evolved from ash. We can't just change the banking systems overnight. And I think a lot of the leftist experiments are on this premise that we can just change the banks.
There's also kind of a premise that environmental damage, which I'm a big environmentalist, I'm very concerned about the environment, extremely concerned about the environment, and I do think global warming is real, maybe overstated, but I certainly think it's real. But I forgot where I was running with that. My mind has gone blank.
It's getting late.
We're yeah. Oh, I forget my point. It'll come back to me probably as soon as we hang up.
It's not the way.
So anyway, no, I really can't remember the point I was going to make.
You got a brain fart.
What was the last thing you were talking about again?
Now I'm a little bit. Now I'm distracted too. Now I think I need some water or some air myself. Now I'm getting a little tired and loopy.
Yeah, so am I. Maybe we should end this, huh? So why don't we end it with a little bit of guitar from you, just a little bit, and then I will cut it off.
Okay. Let's see. Anything in particular?
No, I don't know. Something that shows off your fancy finger work.
Oh, fancy finger work. Okay, something shows that off. Let's see. Whoa, sorry about that. Show off the fancy finger. Now I'm on the spot and I don't know what to do now. Something like that.
That's very good. Okay, we'll leave it there. Reza
Okay.
Ziai.
Yes.
No, is it Zia? No, Ziai.
Ziai. Ziai.
Ziai. Reza Ziai.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
I should
That's
just, you
okay.
know what I always say in my mind? It's Reza Zha, but I'm sure that isn't right. Reza Ziai.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm going to say goodbye. Goodbye from Evil O. I hope you all enjoyed this. Please remember to like and subscribe, and see you next time on Evil O. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye.